we'll do the live thing first. Like, hey everybody, welcome back to the Bigmark podcast. It's me, your host, Bigmark. If it's your first time watching, welcome. If not, welcome back. Like I always say, if you ever wanted to reach out to the podcast, you know, if you want to come on as a guest or let us know about an episode you wanted to see or hear about a topic, hit us up in the DMs or in the comments. Reach out to us on our Twitter or Instagram at the Bigmark Pod or at the Bigmark Podcast. And like I said, you know, I'd love to talk to you. And like I said, hit up the fucking comments too, right? Like I want to see everyone in there too. It's funny, my buddy John Harley, who's been a guest on the podcast several times, has always said, you know, the Bigmark podcast should be the premier Hamilton podcast. Because, I mean, there's not too many that are of Hamilton, like, straight up that I know of that at least boast Hamilton as much as I do. But again, you know, hopefully there's some other Hamiltonians here watching. Thank you so much. Some other music heads, some other people that know what we're talking about today. But again, I always appreciate each and every one of you for being here. You can be anywhere else in the world, but you're with us today, tonight, tomorrow, whenever you're listening. And I thank you. If you ever wanted to support even further, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/thebigmarkpodcast. But again, thank you for being here tonight in any way, shape, or form. I'm really excited about today's episode. I'm sure you've seen in the description and the title of the episode, but we're going to be talking about Warsawpack. And if you've never heard of Warsawpack, don't consider yourself lucky, because there's a lot of people, unfortunately, that don't know about Warsawpack. But they're a phenomenal band here in Hamilton. You know, from the early 2000s. They never really quite fit into any box, but they always had something to say. Really phenomenal band. I love them. You know, they're kind of part hip hop, part jazz, part punk, definitely political. But they were kind of the voice of dissent, if you will, in Hamilton. And it's interesting because, you know, it's a band that I bring up to so many people and they never really know and they never really heard of them. And being from Hamilton, you know, I'm obviously proud of a lot of bands, and I always say, you know, obviously you have Teenage Head, you have, I mean, they're probably the premier band out here. Tommy Swick's another big artist. I mean, there's tons of like kind of small artists. I guess Teenage Head is kind of like the biggest band out of Hamilton. Oh my god. Anyway, there's like some great actors and a lot of celebrities and stuff, but for sure the biggest band out of Hamilton is Teenage Head kind of thing. But you know, Hamilton's kind of a gritty city, right? You know, it's always been the Steel City. It's always had kind of an edge to it, right? So there's always been, you know, bands with some heart or at least something to say, like we said here with Warsawpack. And I was always proud to talk about them. And I would say, hey, have you ever heard of this band Warsawpack? And no one ever knew what the fuck I was talking about. And when I'd put it on, everyone would be like, this is pretty cool. But again, they just never really heard about it. And it kind of makes sense, maybe, why we don't hear about them anymore. We'll get into that later. But they were a band that started in Hamilton in the late 1990s. It was a city of steel mills, factory smoke, working class grit. Out of that environment emerged vocalist Lee Reed and saxophonist Matt Raymond. And those two guys together... those two guys put together the band. And they also got together with Scott Rankin, Yaroslav Wassman, and Matt Cormier. Rankin later left the band and was replaced by Ajit Rao, and later members added to the band were saxophonist and flautist Simon Ochkowitz, and baritone saxophonist Adam Bryant, and turntablist Aaron Salika, aka DJ Realistic. So Lee Rayback, or otherwise known as Lee Reed, was the vocalist, and they kind of created this absolutely amazing sound. You know, they kind of blended influences from Rage Against the Machine to The Roots and Dead Prez to Miles Davis, and they had that like live presence, right? A live band along with a live singer, but like actual drums, actual bass, actual flutes, and there's a DJ too. He was like scratching and adding some samples in, but he wasn't it was really more like vocal samples and kind of like sounds that the rest of the band couldn't make. But their act together became this amazing thing. You know, I always wish I actually got to see them, but I never did. But hearing their albums, you can just imagine these scenes. My parents got to go see them a few times, being tapped into the Hamilton music scene when they were active. I mean, they were active in the early 2000s. I was like like a young teenager, like 12, 13, right? So when these guys were, so I wasn't like going to bars. But this is when they were playing, and it's like a shame. I wish I got to see them, but this live element, and you hear it on the albums. Even you don't have to see them live. You hear it on these albums. You hear the way the band is playing together, and the ways it blends with Lee's vocals, and like it's so like, not to say that other hip hop it doesn't have that, but it's sometimes harder to find when you're putting samples and creating other sounds. But the live experience must have just been so amazing. And they kind of brought this kind of new sound. I mean, at the time, obviously hip hop was hip hop, and then, punk and contemporary music, rock or whatever, if you will, like, kind of like jazz even, was real instruments, if you will. I mean, not to say like an 808 and a turntable isn't a real instrument, but I mean, like, it was like bass drums and instruments you hold in your hand. They weren't always coming together, and like, later on you kind of had like Linkin Park, where they kind of would have a DJ on stage, and like Limp Bizkit and stuff was like this new metal thing. So like you could almost even put them in there, but they just had this much more jazzy element. Again, not only just pretending to be like the samples, because like you can have like live music and then the band is just like playing like a sample or essentially, but like they're like writing this music for this purpose. Warsawpack, which I always used to love as a name because it's a play on the Cold War era, collected defense treaty between Poland and USSR and Europe that was called the Warsaw Pact, or like the Treaty of Friendship or something. Anyway, that kind of got like fucked with in the 80s. Didn't exist. But anyway, Warsaw Pact, like it was an agreement. These guys are called Warsawpack, which I love. It's just like such a cool play on everything. And again, what really did set them apart from everyone was that live instrumentation, horns alongside turntables, and then so much like the thing with Lee's lyrics is that they're so politically heavy. And I think, again, as I will continue to delve into, I think that almost maybe even hurt them in the sense of it becomes harder to kind of play along with a lot of the bullshit. And I agree it's bullshit because I have to do it too, it being in a band. They fucking deal with all the music business aspect of shit, and like, fame can be a weird thing too, right? Like, especially when you're kind of like counterculture. Anyway, one of Lee's quotes are, "We weren't making music for the charts. We were making music for the street marches." So he didn't really give a fuck about what the critical acclaim was. I mean, it's great, I guess, but he didn't give a shit. It was about the music. Their blending of all these live instruments, kind of created this new hybrid method, which is kind of funny because one of their later songs is called Hybrid. But when they first dropped their first debut EP in 2001, it was really catching people's attention, and they were soon signed to G7 Welcoming Committee Records, who also share the same label with the punk pioneers Propagandhi. And the two albums that that they did end up releasing, the first one being Gross Domestic Product, which came out in 2002, was like, raw, just like these jazzy kind of anthems, and Attention to Deficit, which is a phenomenal song about like ADHD drugs and ADHD medication, and how we're like drugging children and doing all these things, and it's like super heavy and really interesting. Valdez, which is obviously about the Exxon Valdez, the like sinking of the like oil tanker that fucked up the ocean. Year of the Car Crash, which is a fucking really cool, really cool, almost like futuristic dystopian kind of idea of how dependent we are on like fossil fuels and cars. Again, this is what I mean. Like, shit's so cool but so political, and like really does like kind of, it's like, even if you've never heard about this shit, it's like almost like just listening to it is like eye-opening. My favorite song personally, and potentially my favorite Warsawpack song in general, is called Doomsday Device, and it's off that same album too. Phenomenal, huge, big, jazzy kind of just like like there's no better term than anthem. It's just big, it's cool. The horns and the flutes are huge, and it's just like super cool. And there's like a big, huge breakdown near the end too. So that, like I said, they were like, I would never ever really consider them metal, but they were like peeking into that like almost hard rock thing. But again, like the horns almost kept them back into this jazz level. Their second album, Stocks and Bombs, came out in 2003. Little tighter production on that one, kind of more sharper focused. I mean, it's always funny with band's first albums, they have all these songs kind of leading up to it that, you know, they've been working on them for God knows how long, and then when you actually go to put it together, it turns into your first album, which is like you've had your whole life to prepare for your first album, and then only basically between the next album and others. Anyway, but Stocks and Bombs was very heavily influenced by the brewing Iraq War that was, you know, really on the horizon in 2003. And well, I mean, they were engaged in it, but it was like, you know, no one knew exactly what was going to happen there. That's for sure. Or maybe Lee did. Again, Hybrid off that album is a really good song, and it's kind of funny. I mean, it took me a long time to actually do this podcast, I have to say. I've always wanted to do this podcast because I love Warsawpack so much. And in fact, when I went to think about doing this podcast, I was like, have I done one already? And I had to look back in the mix, and I couldn't find anything. So if it's still in there, I fucked up. But one of the things that prevented me from doing this podcast was just the lack of information about these guys. Like, they're not on streaming. It's hard. You can kind of find some of their songs on YouTube, but like, I swear to fuck, like, my parents probably have some of the CDs, which I in turn ripped and are on my iTunes on my computer, like on my hard drive. I don't know where else these fucking songs exist. I swear to God. Like, I'm able to listen to them, thank goodness, because I can put it on my phone and listen to them. But you can't find them anywhere. And again, like I said, I feel like Lee's just kind of like, fuck playing those games, and they broke up. Like, don't get me wrong. Unfortunately, they broke up, but, you know, not too long after these albums came out, to be honest. But it's a damn shame that people can't listen to their music, I have to admit. You know, like I mentioned before, there was something about their onstage presence, and kind of what I was able to finally research was, you know, they weren't performers, they were agitators, and it was really this huge fucking, you know, political anti-fucking, you know, protest almost had a feel of that. And live experience felt like being in the front lines of a protest with music is a quote I saw. Like I said, I never got to see them, unfortunately, because I was too young, but I did get to see the last Lee Reed showed at the Casbah here in Hamilton, which was an institution. Unfortunately, it is now closed, but Lee put it on his own show there and played some of his songs and some of his newer songs, and that was really cool, just being able to see him live, because he's just a phenomenal performer, and the way he thinks and the way he can put it into lyrics is just phenomenal. Like I said, you know, his lyrics were like detonations, gentrification, poverty, colonialization, state violence. You know, the whole band embedded themselves in this anti-globalization movements, you know, WTO protests, union rallies, grassroots mobilization. You know, compared to Rage Against the Machine, but Warsawpack kind of leaned harder into the jazz and improvisation, like I've said. You know, unfortunately, like I mentioned, you know, Lee Reed did continue his mission solo after the breakup. But, you know, shortly after 2003, after Stocks and Bombs came out in 2004, Warsawpack had dissolved. Creative tensions, DIY touring fatigue, which I totally understand, because it is fucking hard putting together your own touring schedule. And financial strain, unfortunately, eventually took its toll. And but they left behind a blueprint. Music could be smart and street level. Jazz and rap could be radical and local. They paved their way for Canada's alt political underground. Their sound prefigured the jazz rap revivals seen in Kendrick Lamar. And they were ahead of their time. Like I said, they're one of my favorite bands ever that no one's ever heard of. And if you have heard of them, hit me up, please, because I just want to talk about them. They didn't aim for fame. They aimed to light fires with art as the spark. Their message, it's still burning. It's still there. It's still going. In a world fractured by inequality and war, their music isn't a relic. It's a call. Go listen to their music, man, if you can find it. Hit me up. I don't know. Maybe I got to fucking make my own shit, but it's just not available. You can't even put it on streaming, so I don't even know how I'm going to get it to you. I have to burn some CDs. Go old school. I think Lee Reed would appreciate that. Probably not. Respect, though. You gotta respect it, man. It's a fucking tough decision to make that amazing music and not really let it shine. I don't know if it's, I can't even say it's Lee. It's just the way things fucking went with the band, sounds like. But wish I could find more information. But Warsawpack lives on within us. Thanks y'all for listening. I really appreciate it. Thanks y'all for being here. It was a long time coming to do that podcast. And like I said, like John Harley said, hopefully this will continue to be the Eminent Hamilton podcast that talks about the best of Hamilton, including the best band out of Hamilton, in my opinion. Anyway, next to Reckless Harbor. Thanks again for being here, y'all. Love each and every one of you. Could have been anywhere else in the world, but you're here with me. Like I said, take it easy. We'll see you soon. Peace.